Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, helping you prepare for Thanksgiving with fresh produce, quality meats, and all the ingredients for your favorite holiday dishes. Learn more at Safeway.com or in the Safeway app.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.
There's still no snow on Denver's forecast, and if nothing falls by Friday, this year will officially become the second latest first snowfall on record. But while the metro area keeps waiting, the mountains are finally getting a taste of winter. This week, spots like Vail Pass, Aspen, and Leadville could pick up 1 to 4 inches, and areas around Monument Hill might see 2 to 4 inches as well. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel. Coming up, a local teacher was detained by ICE and now is back in Peru.
There's been a huge surge of this in Colorado and across the country.
Then, after the Evergreen shooting, the Jefferson County sheriff has an idea she hopes could prevent a future tragedy.
Had we had the process sped up and we actually were able to identify the shooter, could we have actually saved him from himself?
And you'll hear the sounds of a vigil that just took place for a boy murdered by a mob 125 years ago.
To take off the blinders, how it plays out into our society to this day.
It's Thursday, November 20th. Here's the news in Colorado today. Families at a Douglas County school got an unusual letter from the principal last month. It informed them that one of the school's 5th grade teachers had been arrested by ICE. The Denver Post's Seth Clement now reports that the teacher, Marina Ortiz, and her family are back in Peru. Seth, can you tell us a bit more about Marina Ortiz, who she was, and where she was teaching?
Yeah, so Marina Ortiz was a teacher at Global Village Academy, which is a charter school in Parker. She taught Spanish. She has been a teacher for at least the last 16 years, and the first 14 of that were in her native country of Peru. ICE said that she had been arrested in 2022 in Arizona after she entered the country.
But she was released and then went to work at the school. So how exactly did she get detained by ICE this time around?
So she was detained late last month, so end of October, when she and her family attended a routine kind of check-in appointment at a ICE field office in Centennial. You know, if you're pursuing legal status, stay in the United States, those are the kind of appointments you go to, similar to going to court.
After ICE took Ortiz and her family into custody, a spokesperson for the school said that she was authorized to work in the U.S. So then what happened? Why was she detained?
Yeah. The school's executive director said that she had legal work authorization to be here through 2029. But unfortunately, work authorization doesn't confer legal status, doesn't give you some sort of way to stay in the United States. It doesn't protect you from being picked up by immigration enforcement if you don't have some other legal status, which apparently they didn't have.
Does ICE contend that her work authorization was not valid? I'm wondering if other school districts could learn anything from this.
No, they haven't said that, at least publicly, to the Denver Post or to other outlets who've covered this.
Seth, you reported that Ortiz and her family are now back in her home country, Peru. What are the circumstances around her leaving the U.S.?
Yeah, so after she and her family were detained, they were taken to a family detention center in Texas. And earlier this month, they requested what's called a voluntary departure. A voluntary departure is sort of like a deportation, but it's less punitive. You, as the person without legal status who's been detained, are basically asking an immigration judge, I would like to go back to my home country. There are rules around it. You have to pay your own way. You have to leave within 2 weeks. Typically, you're removed straight from detention. So that's what happened. They were removed to Peru about a week later. And this is an increasingly common thing that folks in detention are taking. There's been a huge surge of this in Colorado and across the country because there's been obviously a big influx in people who've been arrested. And the Department of Justice and ICE have made it harder to get out of detention, regardless of your circumstances. And so as a result, you're seeing an increase both in deportation orders, which is a judge, saying you're being removed from the country, and these voluntary departures, which is someone basically saying, I'd like to be removed.
What is the significance of Ortiz's story for other immigrants who have appointments in that Centennial office?
Yeah, so in a way, this wasn't surprising when I saw the circumstances of what happened. There have been kind of mounting concern and real life examples of folks going to routine immigration check-ins and being detained, including at the Centennial office. So this is not an uncommon thing. I read a lot of court cases for immigrants who are detained, and it's really common to see this sort of similar set of circumstances. Someone either went to court or went to routine check-in and were subsequently detained.
And what about the school, Global Village Academy? How has this impacted them?
At the time of her arrest, they sent a letter to the school community itself and then, subsequently statements to people like me, to reporters. And in the statement to the community, they kind of seemed to be rallying around Mrs. Ortiz as much as they could. They said their own legal counsel was trying to get involved and find a way to keep her in the United States. Some members of the community started a GoFundMe to help fund the family's legal defense. I think that surpassed $20,000. They sent another letter to the community after Mrs. Ortiz had been removed from the country. And in that letter from the school, they included a statement from Mrs. Ortiz that said that her arrest and detention had taken a terrible emotional toll on her. She called it a life or death experience I never imagined. But she also thanked the school. She said, to the parents, students, and teachers who cared for us, thank you from the bottom of my heart. You gave me hope when I needed it most.
A life or death experience. That's immigration reporter Seth Clement from the Denver Post. Thank you, Seth.
Thank you.
The sheriff in Jefferson County is advocating for national legislation she hopes could prevent a shooting like the one at Evergreen High School. Sheriff Reggie Marinelli says law enforcement couldn't get access to the user behind certain social media posts fast enough to identify him before he carried out the attack.
Had we had the process sped up and we actually were able to identify the shooter, could we have actually saved him from himself?
You may remember hearing about this. The FBI got a tip about the suspect's online accounts in July, 2 months before the attack. The tip came from the Anti-Defamation League, which saw disturbing posts with gun violence and extremist ideologies, according to the group's Oren Siegel.
So the reality is, including in this case in Evergreen, we just didn't know specifically who it was. And frankly, a lot of some of the sort of most explicit threats that we may come across online, we don't always know specifically who it is to be able to reach out. This is where we rely on law enforcement to, do what they can as they investigate.
The FBI did start investigating.
It went through their different levels of threat assessment, and they deemed it a viable threat. So at that point in time, they would do what we would call requesting a search warrant to go after the IP address of that particular threat. But it took weeks. Any social media company that we send a search warrant to has upwards of 35 days to answer that search warrant. So it could take 35 days just to get that IP address.
And getting the IP address is just one step. Sheriff Marinelli says investigators had to get further warrants to figure out who the person is and where they're located.
Once the URL was obtained by the FBI, they turned around and took that information to go and then find out the person's identity through their email address. That takes upwards of 3 search warrants. And if you take 35 days in the state of Colorado for all 3 of those search warrants, you're into 100 days.
So by the time of the Evergreen shooting 2 months later, the FBI had not yet figured out the identity of the person behind the social media accounts. They missed their chance to stop a shooting. That's what Marinelli wants to change. She wants social media companies to be required to turn over digital records much more quickly. Colorado lawmakers considered this type of thing last spring as part of a larger bill to regulate social media, which Governor Jared Polis ended up vetoing because of other provisions in the bill that he objected to. Marinelli knows that there could be concerns about privacy, but she says there's already a high bar to get a warrant.
When we put in a search warrant, we have to have probable cause, and then a judge has to agree with us to actually issue the search warrant. So this is a process that's vetted. It's not just a whim that we go and start asking for people's information. There has to be a reason we're asking for it, and a judge has to agree that that reason is valid.
Marinelli said ultimately she thinks the policy that she has in mind would have to be national in scope to make a real difference, especially given that the original tip about the suspected Evergreen shooter came from New York.
It doesn't do us any good if Colorado changes our law and we have a 24-hour turnaround, but the state of Utah or the state of New Mexico or even New York still has that 30 to 35-day turnaround. It's not going to benefit the totality of it because we don't live in a society anymore that is kind of bordered by your state lines.
In Evergreen in September, the gunman fatally shot himself after severely injuring two of his classmates, and the official investigation into the attack is ongoing. This week, about 30 people gathered to remember a 15-year-old boy named Preston John Porter Jr., a black teenager who was lynched in Colorado 125 years ago for a crime he didn't commit. The group who organized this vigil wants his story to be better known. Denverite's Kara Damari was there. Kara, tell us more about him. Who was Preston Porter Jr. and what happened to him?
Preston Porter Jr. was a teenager living with his family in Lyman in 1900. They worked on the railroad, and then they moved to Denver. But in November of that year, Preston, his father, and his uncle were stopped by police and questioned about the killing of a young white girl back in Lyman. There was no evidence that they were involved, but police held the three family members at the jail inside Denver City Hall. They tortured Preston in a sweatbox until he gave a forced confession. And newspapers at the time openly predicted he'd be lynched if he was transferred from Denver to Lyman. But the authorities moved him anyways, and that's exactly what happened. Just outside of Lyman at a train stop, an angry mob of about 300 people stopped the train, tied him to a stake, and burned him.
That is awful. It's hard to come to terms with something so horrifying happening here. But it seems like the people at this weekend's vigil really emphasize that the story isn't just about the violence, right?
Yeah, this was organized by the Colorado Lynching Memorial Project. They were established in 2018 and is the state's branch of the National Equal Justice Institute. Why should the shadow... At the vigil, people walked through a gallery documenting mob violence across the country. And, lynching didn't only happen in the Deep South. At least 7 anti-Black lynchings happened here in Colorado. Then there were performances from local artists and a gathering at the memorial plaque on the CU Denver campus that tells Preston's story.
One of the things that really stood out to me about your reporting is how personal this felt for the organizers, almost like they see themselves as caretakers of his memory.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the leaders, Javon Mays, said he feels a responsibility to protect Preston's ghost.
I just feel like Preston, I just kind of feel maybe a little uncle-ish.
And he talked about imagining that November train ride, this tiny 15-year-old boy who's just 105 pounds, surrounded by faces he didn't know and not sure what they would do to him.
I just think about trains and train rides and the coldness of November and the passage of all these faces that are holding your welfare, and ultimately they imagine something worse than you could ever imagine.
He also connected Preston's story to modern-day cases like Elijah McClain. He said those deaths pushed him deeper into this work because that same pattern of denying young Black boys grace is still present today.
So I continue to go through this process of thinking about that, about these heavy hands that this world puts on our Black kids.
During the vigil, there was this group discussion about why some people don't want the history of these type of incidents in the U.S. to be shared.
Yeah, during the discussion, someone had said, America embraces amnesia. And experts say there's pressure, politically and culturally, to forgive and forget, to stop talking about things like lynching, racism, or state violence. But they argue that understanding this history actually brings communities closer together because it makes people confront the truth.
What are the organizers' hopes that come out of this? I mean, they're putting Preston's story more firmly into the public memory. So what do they expect to happen?
Yeah, they hope that by telling the truth about Preston Porter Jr. and about lynching as a tool of terror, it becomes harder to ignore how that history echoes into the present.
It is absolutely to try to hopefully set the table for white America. You take off the blinders, and the thing is you don't have to do anything here. You just have to tell the truth.
The plaque that honors Porter in downtown Denver was installed in 2020. That same year, a sample of soil from that site in Denver and another from the lynching site in Lyman were sent to Alabama to be displayed in a museum with other jars of soil from lynching sites across the country.
Denverites Cara Damari, thank you.
You're welcome.
Additional reporting for today's show came from CPR's Andrea Dukakis. For more news about your community, make sure to follow Colorado Today in your podcast app. I'm Arlo Perez Esquivel. This is CPR News.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Safeway, helping you prepare for Thanksgiving with fresh produce, quality meats, and all the ingredients for your favorite holiday dishes. Learn more at Safeway.com or in the Safeway app.
Support for Colorado Today comes from Credit Union of Colorado. With access to over 30,000 ATMs and a mobile app, they're dedicated to offering the services of a big bank with a heart. Learn more at honestlygood.org.